Kevin Doyle. I'm the president of the graduate school here at Hazelden Betty Ford, and I think of myself as a counselor and a counselor educator professionally. Even though I'm in an administrator role with kind of a cool title, I came up through the ranks. In fact, my first job was a counseling assistant at a residential treatment center when I was in grad school, and I got paid to play pool volleyball and softball and sit in on 12-step meetings. And I was saying, I'm getting paid for this,
Best.
and I got my master's and took a counseling job working with adolescents, which I love that population. And I get a little upset when people say, "Oh, kids aren't ready to accept help; they can't get into recovery." And I saw some who really did have successful treatments in their teenage years and remained in recovery for decades. And so I love it. I love having that opportunity. And because I'm the beneficiary of a really good education, I was able to move into supervisory and then managerial kinds of roles. Even though I never chose to do that, but they bribe you with, no, I don't want to do that. You're going to pay me how much?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
well, maybe I will. And one thing led to another. And so I worked with a variety of populations, and then later in life decided that teaching was something I wanted to pursue. And so I went ahead and got a doctoral degree so that I could do that if I ever wanted to. Taught as an adjunct professor for 13 years, and then asked my wife's permission to go over to she's a professor, and go over to the dark side of academia about 14 years ago. And so became a professor. And then when I saw the opportunity to be the dean at Hazel and Betty Ford, even though I didn't plan to move to Minnesota, but Hazel and Betty Ford, such a big name in the treatment and recovery world. I sort of told people it's like if the Yankees come calling, if you're a baseball fan, you kind of have to listen. So
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
don't like the Yankees, but so, that's my professional life. And personally, my wife and I have been married for 40 years this year. We've got three grown children and very blessed with them. And we have a 5-year-old grandson who rode his first roller coaster last week. And
Get out of
we
here.
got a great photo of him. He said it was horrifying. That's a 5-year-old speaking, um, riding this roller coaster. So, I've had a lot of blessings in my life, and really enjoy the opportunity to try to do my part to give back. And I've only worked in addiction my whole career, and and as a person who's not in recovery, that's a little bit unusual. And so I just love meeting the students of today who will become the practitioners of tomorrow, and gives me a lot of joy and fulfillment. So.
Was there, thank you for that. It's so good to get to know you and learn these things about your experience. Was there something that happened to you or interested you that kind of nudged you this way? It maybe in your formative years. I know for me, it was partially just fate. Like things seemed to kind of happen, and then there was an opportunity. But then also, being in recovery, it was I was kind of in that lane anyways. But I'm curious for you.
Yeah, not really, but and I think that whether it's fate or a higher power or something, things happen to us sometimes, and we don't always pick or control our destinies. But
Yeah.
I would say that two things. One is after I finished my undergraduate, something I don't really know what had me sign up to take a college course, just one course. I wasn't in a degree program in what was then called substance abuse, and
Yeah.
I was fascinated. We read a
Yeah.
book called Under the Influence by James Milam, which was very formative and influential to me, that really introduced the disease model, which I'd
Yeah.
never been exposed to. And I found myself talking about it with my roommates. And
Oh, wow.
believe me, that was not what we normally talked about. And then the other piece is, so later when I went back for a master's degree in counseling, I still hadn't made a decision to go in the addiction direction, but you have to choose internship sites. And I remembered that course and that book, and I said, well, maybe I'll explore that in my internship settings. And the closest I can describe it is what do counselors have in common? We become involved when people want to change. They want to change something, their
Mm.
relationship, their physical health, their mental health, their job. Counseling is about change. That's at its
Love
core.
that.
That's what it's about. Well, what more profound change is there
Right.
than recovery from addiction? When I started hearing stories of people at 12-step meetings, because I would have to drive the patients, I was blown away. The dramatic nature of change and what people can accomplish when they get into recovery, it just blew me away. And
Yeah.
I kind of said, even though I'm not a fellow traveler in recovery, I want to be part of that. I want what they have, like they say
Yeah.
in the 12-step meetings. And so, um, and again, because I'd been the fortunate person to have had a really strong education, doors were fairly open in many ways. And so, so I was able to make that. I mean, it sounds like overstating it, but it's been my life's work. I mean, 40 years in
Yeah.
this area of counseling, and I'm a sucker for a good story. And when I hear someone tell their recovery story and see what they can do as a person in recovery, it's all worth it.
It's so compelling, the stories. I'm a big story guy. I think it's as human beings, it's how we, for millennia, have connected past information,
Yeah,
all of the things that make us human. And
yeah,
I think you're absolutely right. And I love how you put that. Counseling, we become involved when people want to change. I think so often there's I don't know if it's a stigma, but there's this perception that we get involved when there's a problem, right? And I think for that reason, that sometimes um, is a barrier, I think, because people think, oh, I have to have a problem, or it is a problem. I'm a problem if these kinds of things. But
yeah.
for you to put it as a change, did you hear that somewhere, or what
You
gave
know,
you?
I no, I don't think so. It sort of hit me because I get asked this question a lot. Why do you do this work? And I try not to get defensive. I try to frame it as a positive that people in recovery have terms for people like me, earth people and
Uh,
muggles and normies and all that. And I embrace that. And but I've tried to dissect what is it, because there really isn't. I mean, every family has some addiction somewhere, but it was not very direct to me
yeah,
of, cousins or whatever. But so I sort of started thinking about it. I said, counselors try to facilitate change on some
yeah.
level. So I think that's kind of what it was. But I'm like you, it's the stories. It's the stories.
It also speaks to the fact that it's hard for people to change
Yeah.
because we wouldn't have a job if it were easy to
If it
change.
were easy. Yeah.
Right.
Or for the people that it was easy for, they already did that. They don't need us. But
Right.
um,
Well, and I think not to make addiction seem like it's special or anything, but particularly with addiction, it's hard for people to change,
that's right.
for sure. So, and I want to hear more about the school. I
Yeah.
know about y'all peripherally, but I really don't have an intimate um, understanding of you all. So I'd love to hear about the school and your role in the school and like, what things are happening up there and
Yeah.
all of
Yeah.
that stuff.
Yeah, I'll do my best to be relatively concise. So, Hazel and Betty Ford has a graduate school because in the early 1960s, some very visionary people realized that no one was educating people to
Mm,
do this work. And so, what was started in the 60s was called the Counselor Training Program. And so, people came from all around the world, literally countries all over I mean, 40 or 50 countries, as well as from across the US, to learn how to do this work. And it was similar to kind of what we do now in the immersion programs, but it wasn't for a week, it was for a year.
right.
They would come and observe and have classes, and they got what we would call a certificate now,
Yeah. Okay.
but then it was literally a piece of paper, a certificate. And they would go back to their home countries or home states and often start programs because in the 1960s and 70s, there weren't a lot of treatment programs. There were some. And over those next 3 decades, 3.5 decades, healthcare became more and more regulated, and you had to have credentials. And so by the 1990s, it became clear that this program probably needed to change, either stop existing or change into something more formal. And so
Sure.
in 1999, after discussions with some local schools, in Minnesota. This was all Minnesota based. The decision was made, let's just start our own freestanding graduate school. And we went through the accreditation process. So we've been a graduate school only since 1999. So we're pretty new. We don't have an undergraduate institution. We only do graduate education and counseling. We got accredited so that students could borrow money to attend the school if they needed to. We went from I think it was a 44 or 38 credits up to 60 because that's what you need for the highest level of licensure as a counselor.
Exactly. Yep.
And then in the
Yep.
mid-teens, visionary people then realized that online education was here. And so we started an online program that has been growing tremendously. And so
Yeah.
87% of our students now are in the online program. So they're from
Wow. Okay.
typically all around the country. We have quite a number of students from Georgia, for example.
Really? How about that?
And they come to Minnesota twice during the course of their degree for a 1 week residency. So it's hard to educate someone fully online, asynchronously. So we do have in-person components for a week at a time. And those are fantastic weeks because the students love it, and they appreciate learning in person, but their average age is 43. So they have lives and families and
Yeah.
jobs,
Yeah.
and they need the flexibility of an online asynchronous program. And so we currently have about 250 students. It looks like summer we might push that again into another record-breaking semester. And we just had commencement on this past Friday. So
Oh,
we're
wow.
recording this on a Wednesday for your listeners. So 5 days ago, we celebrated about 65 graduates from this past year. And they are out in the world now, either looking for a job. Most of them already have jobs, and again, all around the country. And so it's really fulfilling. We have a very strong mental health content so
Okay.
that our graduates can work with complex cases, people with co-occurring disorders, not just substance use disorder. We're accredited by KCREP, which is the leading credentialing body for counselor training, um, and we just love our students. We have 7 full-time professors, probably going to hire an eighth before too much longer, and um, they're very accomplished practitioners. And we have all the things that, well, I shouldn't say all the things because our football team is undefeated, but no, and you're in the South, so that's important. But yeah,
Yeah.
um, but we have to have a registrar's office and student success, financial aid offices, Title IX coordinator, all the things that a larger university has.
Sure.
We don't have campus housing. Our Minnesota students, live close enough that they can drive to campus, but if they are in the on-campus program, but most are in the online program. So that's sort of the big picture of our school, and my role is president. But we're part of Hazel and Betty Ford, so we don't have a separate identity. We're part of a larger organization.
Yeah, because I was going to ask about curriculum and the I think it's important because I know if, like as someone a social worker in the counseling profession, licensure as you mentioned is you have to have it, right? And so your students graduate with an eligibility for the LPC. Is that
Correct.
correct?
That's
Right.
correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's great. And I would imagine in order to do that, you have to meet certain curriculum requirements. I don't know. I don't know if you could do a whole program just focused on substance use disorder, but it sounds like it's got to be holistic in some way.
That's right. That's right. So KCREP mandates a lot of those things for us, and I don't want to bore the people who are listening to this, but basically we have to have very broad, just like you're a social worker, as I recall, right? So
Yep.
similar.
Yep.
You have broad counselor training, skills, techniques, theories, all of those things.
Okay.
Have the addiction counseling specialty area. So you
Okay.
meet the core requirements for counseling that all counselors have to have, whether you're working in a school setting or a mental health setting or a private practice or career. All of us have the core training. And then we add on all that specialty content to meet the addiction counseling requirement. So there's lots of mental health in there. And yes, the LPC, some states call it the LMHC or the
Okay.
LPCC, but basically that is the goal is that our students will be able to sit for the exam and become licensed at the highest level for counselors.
And it's so great. What I keep hearing over and over again, and this wasn't novel information, but from the students that come through the immersion, right, from all different disciplines, medicine, pharmacy, social work, counseling, they don't learn about substance use in school. None of them.
No.
I mean, it's a footnote, it's an afterthought, right? And to have a program where so aside from the core curriculum, what is the focus on addiction look like? Like, are they taking? I'm curious. What kind of classes are they taking?
Yeah.
How many?
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, addiction is woven into pretty much every single course we offer, but some are more traditional, like lifespan development. You need to know that, sort of human growth and development was what it was called when I was coming through. Career is an important area of counseling because everyone's life is impacted by their vocational choices and their work. And so those are the core curricular requirements, skills and techniques and theories, as I mentioned before. But we have courses in diagnosis and assessment of co-occurring disorders, for example. So the DSM-5, which is the go-to manual for all of us in the mental health professions, is part of the curriculum. And so our students are very capable of working with folks who have additional diagnoses to substance use. And some of them might not choose to work in the substance use arena for their whole careers, and they're prepared to do that. So, but most of them choose us because they do have a passion for an interest in substance use and addiction, and that's what they'd like to do. And but we don't presume to say you're going to be limited to that for your 30-year career. So those would be some of the areas. All of our information obviously is on the website where we have our curriculum, spelled out for people who might want to get a sense of what would some of these courses look like. And then any training of a mental health professional, of course, has to include internship and practicum experiences. And so
I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
yeah, you've got the classroom, part, if you will. So it's probably similar for you as social workers, but they have to do a 100-hour practicum and then 600 hours of internship. And so those are three separate experiences. And I encourage students to look at three separate sites, three separate populations. If you don't know who you want to work with, you could work on a women's unit, you could work on an adolescent unit, and those might be residential, and then go do outpatient. And, so that at the end of your degree, you'll have a sense of, what have you fallen in love with? What popular, for me, it was adolescence.
Yeah.
I just love the energy and all the things that the kids bring to, to the treatment environment. I don't think I could do that work now, at my age and at this stage of my life and career. But I always say when our students come for residency, I say, how many of you are working with adolescents? And when they raise their hand, I say, God bless you,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's hard. And also, thank you for doing this work because a lot of people say, well, I don't work with those kids. They're too hard. I don't want to put up with all that stuff. So I think it takes a special person. And, um, but there are all kinds of subspecialties within addiction. There's a booming area, of course, with the older population and
Right.
very few
Absolutely.
resources for them. Um, Gambling is exploding around us. We don't do a lot with that yet, but we're really looking very hard at can we add some courses to our curriculum for folks who might want to work with behavioral addictions in general, but gambling specifically is a really big need too. So those are things that our students can get as part of their education.
And do they you mentioned being an addictions counselor and I think it's different for every state. I know in Georgia we have the Georgia Addiction Counselor Association, who they do a certification process, and then there's another one that has a lot of letters. So do they leave with an addiction counseling certificate or some way of identifying that as their specialty or
Yes. So their degree is Master of Arts in Counseling, specialty area addiction counseling.
gotcha.
So that's on their transcript and on their diploma, and clearly spelled out in the courses that they've taken. But you kind of hit the nail on the head there, though. Each state does it a little bit differently. So about half of the states have a separate addiction counseling license. Of course, the other half don't. Um, Within the broader practice as an LCSW or as a LPC, you can work with a wide variety of populations as long as you have the education to do that. So we really push licensure. Certification is wonderful, but it's typically not sufficient to allow you to bill to a
Right,
payer
exactly. Exactly.
or to have a private practice. So we really push licensure
Yep.
really strongly. That preserves your flexibility down the road.
Yep.
It gives you the most hireability
Yep.
quotient.
Oh,
And if you want to have a private practice one day, a license will allow you to do that. So we really believe strongly in licensure. If a state has licensure for, like my home state has licensure as an addiction, it's a terrible name, licensed substance abuse treatment practitioner, terrible
oh,
term.
wow.
I have that, but I also have the LPC. So,
Okay.
I can go in either direction. So anyone listening to this would sort of want to look at what does your state offer. Certifications are good too, but they're just not quite to the level of licensure in my view. And so it goes to show that you have some specialized training, but it doesn't necessarily allow you the same privilege as a license does.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's almost a necessity in this line of work. You have to be licensed. It's just the way the healthcare system is set up.
That's right. That's
It's
right. And if we want equal standing as social workers or counselors to psychologists or other physicians, I mean, the levels of education obviously are different, but that the language in healthcare is a language of licensure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But to your point, I look at the additional credentialing of I'm a master addiction counselor through NADAC.
Yes.
And I look at it as something that sets me apart on an application or just kind of denotes that there is this specialty in that area. So that's kind of how I tell people because
Yeah.
I think it can be confusing, especially if someone is naive to the whole process of like, well, should I get to go with the counseling route? And I'm like you, I'm always emphasizing licensure that this is a must.
I would disagree with you when you said it can be confusing. I would say it is confusing.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
It's
absolutely.
always confusing. And so it's hard for students. They're getting so much thrown at them. And which association should I be in? And which license should I get? So just, folks need to ask for help, ask their professors, ask the students who are a year or two ahead of them, ask for advice from people you work with on all those things. I had the MAC credential as well, but when I got that Virginia substance use license, I didn't feel as if I still needed the certification. But if you live in a state where you don't have addiction counselor licensure, I think the MAC is one of the premier ways of demonstrating competence in addictions.
Yeah, I was turned off by our Georgia association. And I just decided that, I wanted to, if I was going to pay money every year and, and do continuing education, that I was going to support that. But that's neither here nor there. But tell me about your students. As far as what you mentioned, the average age is 43, that a lot of them are working professionals and have a family. So I'm curious to know more about what kind of learner is is drawn to the graduate school, or are you all designed with a particular learner in mind?
Yeah, yeah, great question. You asked great questions, John. A couple things come to mind. One is a person in recovery, obviously, is a common pathway. The second would be people who are working in a mental health or substance use setting now that are at a bachelor's degree level and are really going to hit a ceiling very quickly.
Yep.
And they realize that I've got to get a clinical license, at least a master's degree, but preferably a license. So they're doing that work in the field, they're enjoying it, but they're going to have limits placed on what they can do clinically and on their future earnings. And they realize that a master's degree is something I need to do. And so many of them have an opportunity to utilize maybe a tuition benefit program that their employer offers.
Okay.
So about 30% of our students are currently Hazel and Betty Ford employees, for example. And so
Really?
yeah, so these are people who are, people know them in our field as techs, a patient care tech or a
Yes.
psych tech.
Yes.
They might have a bachelor's degree in psychology. The jobs for bachelor's degrees in psychology are relatively few. So you're going to be working, an evening shift or overnights or,
Yeah.
assisting in the milieu, as we say,
Yeah.
but not really a clinical job. And so Hazel and Betty Ford has a strong tuition reimbursement benefits to incentivize some of our folks to take advantage of that. They come to our own graduate school, which is an unusual thing. But of course, 70% of our students are not employees here. So these are people who are out in the field working like the Hazel and Betty Ford employee might be, or these are what we refer to as career changers or career switchers. And so kind of two pathways there. One would be someone who has a treatment experience. They go get help. They enter this amazing recovery community, person in recovery. They remember the counselor who helped them and they're working, oh, I don't know, today I'll pick on accounting. They're working as an accountant. And
Okay.
it's just not as meaningful anymore to them. And they've had a life-changing experience and they say, I want to do something with a little more direct benefit. No disrespect to all the accountants listening. Um,
Sure.
and so they Google and they say addiction counseling master's program and they say, oh, I didn't know Hazel and Betty Ford had a graduate school, which is common. And then they learn it's online and they can do it not having to move to Minnesota. And one thing leads to another, and they pursue our school. And that's it's really exciting. And some of them are, these we've had priests, we've had medical doctors, we've had nurses, we've had accountants, we've had lawyers, all of which are very reputable and respected careers. But these career changers and career switchers, sometimes they've made a lot of money and they're able to finance their own education, and sometimes not. It just depends. But and then it could be informed by a family experience, an overdose death, someone they know is in recovery, or they personally are themselves. And so that's a part of it. And then the last one I'll mention, which is really exciting, and I'm not sure you know about this yet, but a couple of years ago, we learned that it is not mandated by our accreditors that you have to have a bachelor's degree to pursue a master's degree.
Really?
It is not mandatory. It's a decision that each school is allowed to make. I didn't know that either. And
Wow.
then as I poked around, I realized that a lot of schools would consider someone. They didn't really publicize it very much because they're worried about hurting their reputation. So our faculty had to embrace this, which they did. We piloted a semester it was either 8 or 9 students came in who could use their work experience to persuade the faculty that I possess the skills and knowledge necessary. Because if you think about it, a lot of our master's programs, they can't designate the undergraduate major because those are decisions people made when they're 19 years old. So we accept people from a wide variety. You just have the letters BA or BS after your name,
Yeah.
sometimes 20 and 25 years old. And so we decided to look at other things, work experience especially, but certification as an addictions counselor without a bachelor's, some of those certifications don't require a bachelor's degree.
Right.
Life experience, that in and of itself, that's not sufficient, but that could be part of the whole equation. And after the first semester of piloting that with those 8 students, they had a higher grade point average than the rest of the student body
What?
because they brought in knowledge from the workplace. I mean, when you
Yeah,
think
yeah,
about it, right, it makes
yeah.
sense. So we've expanded that, and those
Wow.
students are doing exactly the same. We were measuring all kinds of things like retention rate, graduation rate, grade point average. We've had our first 6 graduates. The only thing we're waiting on now is their licensure exam pass rates.
Right.
If they get licensed at the same rate, then we know we're really onto something. And we really
Wow.
believe that we are. So that has been life changing, both for the students, but also for us as we look at who are these folks who are going to do this work down the road. And if you're 55 years old and dropped out of college because you were drinking too much, and you never went back to school, there's a pathway for you too. Again, they have to, the bar for them to be admitted is high.
Yeah.
They have to really persuade us that, because we would never want to take advantage of anyone, that you're ready for this. But if you've run a business, you've hired, people working for you, you've had a successful career in some related industry. Um, the risk of them not being successful, and they take their studies so seriously. It's just a pleasure to be around them. So that's there's a lot of talk about innovation out there, but higher ed is not actually famous for innovation. We do things the way we've always done them, and this is something that we're really proud of. So.
Absolutely. Wow. That blows my mind. Because it's harder to get a bachelor's degree than it is to get a master's degree.
In many ways, it is. I mean,
You
we have
know?
these artificial things like 4 years and 120
Yeah.
credits. Well,
Yeah.
a lot of undergraduate institutions are now looking at 90 credit bachelor's degrees because there's not a lot of science behind higher ed structure. It's just an inherited thing that
Yeah.
has been the way we do it. 120 credits in 4 years, and these 2 semesters of 15 weeks, and there is change there. There are a lot of schools that are doing shorter semesters, 6 weeks. So you're
Right.
focused rather than 15. And of course, online education and there is some innovation. I don't mean to say that there's not, but so we're part of that. And we're making sure that we track the data really carefully to show that these are students who are having really good outcomes. And so far, every indication so far is very positive.
That's incredible. And I graduated with my undergraduate in psychology from Northeastern University in Boston.
Yeah.
And it was offered kind of in a hybrid format. I lived up there, so I did a number of in-person classes, but I took many classes online and actually found, and particularly I was a little bit older. I wasn't 18. I was, I think, in my late 20s, early 30s. And so I had, I wasn't out partying and doing all those things. I was focused and pretty
Yeah. Yep.
pretty locked in.
Yep.
But I found the online actually to be better, not just for the convenience sake, but you go in, and this is a generalization, but especially in the bigger classes, you can kind of fade into the back. You don't really have to participate all the time.
100%.
You
Yep.
know, with online, you had mandatory discussions. That my on top of the tests and the papers and all of that stuff, we had discussion boards that
Yep.
we had to participate in the weekly
That's
content.
right. Same thing at our school. Yep.
And we had to respond. I think we had to, there was usually like four discussion questions, and then you also had to respond to other students. So it was almost, I felt more involved.
Yeah, I think that's right. I was very intimidated in my undergraduate education and at a very good school, William and Mary in Virginia. And I can only remember a few times in my whole 4 years actually speaking in class.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
I sat in the back, and I mean, maybe not necessarily in the back, but I was a little bit intimidated, and it was easy to just sit and listen and take the test and turn the papers in. But yeah, it was as our students are required to do the same thing, weekly engagement on discussion boards. So there you got 15 weeks that you're going to be engaging. I never spoke 15 times, and I can remember maybe one class, maybe I did, but whereas in every class you have to participate on that in that level. So I think online education has added something that we were missing before.
And I think we're learning too that it has some transferability with treatment. Because I think HBFF did a study comparing in-person to virtual IOP and found that the virtual IOP was just as effective as the in-person,
Yeah.
right? And so that's also really compelling. And so yeah, I think COVID really pushed us into this world of functioning virtually, and for better sometimes, for worse sometimes, but
Yeah.
so here's the $1 million question. Why should someone want to do this work, whether it's counseling or a career in substance use disorder, and then maybe also why should they do it at the Hazelden Betty Ford Graduate School?
Yeah. Well, I think the first part of that is, without sounding trite, um, you really make a difference, for people. And there are other places where obviously where um, where folks can make a difference. But I would just say that substance use and mental health are areas where we face very, very profound workforce challenges. Uh,
Yes.
and if you're any good at this, you'll find a job. There just will not be that the way the workforce is now, there's a lot of turnover. It's not always easy,
Yeah.
but it's very rewarding,
Yeah.
and we need good people to do this work. So, I mean, that's the why, I think. And,
Yeah.
whether you believe again in a higher power or just using your gifts and talents to serve others. A lot of people, really would like to make a difference. And what do you have to show at the end of your life, that you helped others? I think that's pretty important. So this is a place to do that. Why Hazel and Betty Ford? I mean, we were really the first to do this work, both on the treatment side, dating back to 1939 when we were founded, or 1949. How to do the math? I lose track when that was,
It was
1940.
a long time ago.
1949, yeah, because we just celebrate our 75 years.
Wow.
And then the counselor training program starting in the 1960s. So, we're have been doing this longer than anyone. That doesn't mean we're the best since just because of doing it the longest, but we really are a single purpose institution. This is all we do.
Yeah.
So we don't have a football team. We don't
Yeah.
have an undergraduate institution. We don't have the psychology, the philosophy department and the business school competing with us. We are solely focused on this. And will we add degree programs in the future? Maybe, like healthcare administration or something that's pretty related, but right now, all we're doing is preparing counselors to work in this really complicated healthcare industry that we have, helping people with substance use and mental health conditions to get the services they need and to recover. And so, can other schools say that? I suppose so, but not many of them have the same constellation of services that we do on the treatment side. You can do your internships at a Hazel and Betty Ford program if you study on campus, when people come into my office, I say, you can do your internship in that building right over there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And most mental health and human services programs rely on finding a program within the community, and you can do that. And our online students to find, programs in their communities, like in Atlanta, they can do internships with you guys. But, but those are some unique things about what we have to offer. Our professors are all really accomplished people. Most of them are licensed practitioners too. So you'll be learning from people who've done this work, but you'll be exposed to classmates who share that same passion that you do. So those are some of the things that help us to stand apart.
I would think the sole focus, along with the intimate nature of the program, are huge assets. You
Yeah,
know, you're not getting a watered down experience. It's a real focused. Everybody has the same mission, the same vision, right? Which I think is a big plus. And to your point about working in the field and seeing people change, I remember early in my career, it's such a stark thing when you see someone come into a treatment center on the worst day of their life,
yeah.
literally crawling through the door, right? And then to watch sometimes within 30 days, this complete and utter transformation in a person. I had one client a patient who came to us essentially I mean, he was in DTs and he was essentially comatose. We had to send him to the ER and thought he was admitted to the hospital. We thought he was going to die. I mean, he had his late stage liver disease, alcohol induced, and it was bad. And I went to see him in the hospital. This was on a Friday. And on Monday, when I came back to work, he was sitting up in the patient area eating breakfast. And I walked in there and I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's dramatic, right? My first job where I worked with the adolescents, I would walk up to the detox unit and see how sick these folks were. And I would look at somebody who looked like they were 70 or 75 years old and they were 50, you know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But you give them a few weeks and months of recovery and abstinence, they were just dramatically, the human body is an amazing thing, and the healing, that can occur is just as amazing. And then to see some of them come back into the workforce too is a really cool thing. But you're right, it's just dramatic. It's like nothing else.
And you said it earlier, that's what keeps us coming back. And then there's the flip side, which is the high burnout. I think there is a risk of becoming jaded or
Yes.
burned out, of course. And I know one of the things that I had to learn early on, you mentioned that one of the primary pathways for your students is their own lived experience. And I remember thinking naively that when I got into the field as a counselor, it was going to make me super sober, right? That I was going to be, this, now I'm entering into the upper echelon. And I had one of the counselors tell me that it was the opposite, that it can chip away at your recovery.
Interesting. Yeah.
And you have to be prepared to put back in to the cup, which is interesting. I haven't necessarily found that to be true, but it was meaningful in the sense that I had to learn that this wasn't going to make me super sober. That this was not going to replace a program of recovery that was personal to me. And
Yeah.
so that was an important piece of it. But yeah, the I just, in my experience working in mental health, yes, you see, of course, healing and dramatic changes in people that's remarkable, but there's just something about addiction. I think the way that it beats a person down physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. I think the dramatic way that people deteriorate, and then in some cases quickly
Yeah.
recover is remarkable.
Yeah. All of that's true. And what I would add is, in addition to the ways people are beaten down, society has often given up on them,
Hmm.
and so sometimes we have an opportunity as professionals to work as advocates, to say just because someone had a drunken public offense 10 years ago doesn't mean they should be barred from future employment opportunities. And so, you know, none of us should be held to account, I don't think, for the worst moment we had when we were
Right.
19 years old. I mean, obviously with some exceptions, but and there are societal barriers for people sometimes that were caused by their active addiction.
Right.
They get treatment, they're in recovery, tax-paying, law-abiding citizens, and we know that these are people who can really move into positions of great responsibility, and yet maybe there's a barrier there that needs to be addressed. And so yes, they're beaten down, and then sometimes they're beaten down by something like that.
Yeah.
I can't get this job because of a well-intended law, perhaps, but we need to relook at those things if we really believe in recovery.
I'll have to send you my last episode. I interviewed two nurse anesthetists. One of them happens to be my wife, and they both are in recovery, and both um, are actively work as nurse anesthetists, and they talk nationally on stigma, and they talk a lot about reentry for recovering nurse anesthetists. Re-entering the field is exceptionally challenging because of that stigma. And the one of the guests, she was 20 plus years in recovery, okay? And she moved from, I believe it was Arizona to Texas. And Texas was punitive to her. They would not let her get a license for 9 months. They made her get back on a consent, and they made her take these courses on ethics amongst other things. 20 plus years in recovery. It's like, whoa, wow, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and so some of the more rewarding things in my career have related to, and I've worked with licensed healthcare professionals as well, like, as you mentioned, and um, helping them to get back, the privileges to do the kind of work they're clearly capable of doing,
Yeah.
and advocate on their behalf, and sometimes alongside people who could tell their own story. Um, so that's a very real thing.
Yeah, and they talk about there's no data that suggests that recovering CRNAs specifically are at any risk to the patients. Like it's not they are not a risk or a liability. Well, Kevin, this has been awesome. This has been so informative for me, and I have enjoyed talking to you.
Well, likewise, I've enjoyed talking to you too, John. It's good to reconnect after a couple of years of sort of being on the fringes of being in touch.
Yeah.
And I hope some folks listen to this and maybe get inspired to go back to school. If they come to us, great. But maybe they'll go somewhere else, and that's okay too, because workforce challenges are very real. So if we can ever help a potential student in any way, just to talk through what that looks like. And it's also fun to see students who are there for the right reasons. Some folks go to school because they don't know what else to do, and they just after high school they go to college and get a master's, and it doesn't seem very intentional sometimes. And our school is full of people who have made very intentional choices, and that's really fun.
Getting a degree is a big deal.
Yeah,
Especially, I think people in recovery. I know it was for me. It was
yeah,
so meaningful to get. It was a huge milestone.
absolutely. Well, thanks, John. Thanks for the work you're doing.
Yeah.
I hope we get to collaborate in the future, and it's been just a pleasure talking with you today.
Yes, absolutely. All right, I'll talk to you soon,
All right,
Kevin.
sounds good. Thanks, John.
Bye.
Bye.